In this session, we're going to talk about the difference between chasing, attracting, and being irresistible. Now, this can apply to business, this can apply to your health goals, and of course, to dating and relationships. So, I'm going to share several examples with you here. This is a topic that's talked about a decent amount, and at the same time, it's widely misunderstood. Okay. So, my question for you, what does the word irresistible, what does that mean to you? And I remember a while ago, I was living in Vegas at the time, and I got introduced to a gentleman. His name was Marshall. He was a hypnotist, and he would talk about this concept of irresistible influence. And whenever he said it, he would just kind of chuckle. It was like his signature thing. It was a little bit of a gimmick, but it really stuck in my head because his definition of having irresistible influence was getting people to do what you want and have it think it was their idea. And I thought it was interesting at the time, but I didn't quite get it from an energy and identity sense. And what I want to share with you today is where that stems from and how to create that. I'm not talking necessarily just about influencing others. I think more importantly, how to influence yourself using that approach. So, if you look around, you'll see that most people in the world, especially when it comes to achieving a goal or fulfilling a certain type of intention, are either in inaction, where they're whining about something, they're in fear, they're desperate, they're not doing a whole lot to move towards where they want to be, or they're chasing, quite literally, chasing what they want, and ironically, having it run the other way. Sort of like that old cartoon where you had the roadrunner and the coyote. The coyote was constantly on the chase. He was always running after the roadrunner, but he'd never catch the roadrunner. He probably wouldn't know what to do with the roadrunner if he caught it because he was so addicted to the chase, right? Now, what we're talking about also corresponds to the map of consciousness, which you probably heard me talk about. If we look at things from energy standpoint, if we look at things from the levels of energy and measuring energy. So, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some examples, and we're also going to talk about how to transcend yourself into being irresistible to more of what you'd like to experience. Now, let's start with a business example. Let's start about talking about getting clients if you're new to starting a business. And I remember when I started my first real business, this was back in 2016, 2017. The very first thing that I did, accidentally, and I say accidentally in air quotes, fell into that business because what I did is I would go to networking events, not even with the intention really of trying to get clients or chasing business, right? So there's an important lesson there in itself of being detached and just showing up attractively, okay, which we'll get to in a moment. But I would show up and a couple of people wanted to work with me based on some of the things that I mentioned, and that's how I got my first clients. Now, when I realized that I wanted to make it a business, I got into more of a chasing mode. And I believe that people like you and I, if you're listening to this, you don't really have a problem taking action. I think the issue with a lot of personal development, a lot of transformational advice out there is it's geared towards people who have trouble with taking action, right? And people like you and I, we don't really have trouble taking massive action, right? Someone once told me her mantra was do it scared, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, but I don't have a problem doing it, right? My issue historically, right, has been this thing that we're talking about here, not understanding the difference between chasing, attracting, and becoming irresistible to something. And I believe a lot of people, especially business people, have this issue when it comes to getting clients and making sales and a number of other things. And so early on in my business, what I would do is I would go to a bunch of networking events. I was living at Vegas at the time, I had these business cards printed. I knew what my offer was, what I was selling, and I was determined. Now, I will say there's a great power, there's a great conviction, determination. I was determined to make stuff happen, and I was willing to do pretty much whatever it took, right? I was willing to make outbound calls. When I got someone's business card at a networking event, I would call them on my lunch break. I was working a day job at the time. I would call them on my lunch break, trying to get a meeting so I could sell stuff. It was very much willful, very much determined. And I think sometimes it's necessary as a data point when we're starting something new and we're making changes and we're creating transformation to start with massive action because it shows the universe and it shows yourself a level of commitment. And it also makes you more attractive to, in this case, the clients that you want to attract. Now, The chasing and the massive action, if you're trying hard, it turns people off in anything, right? Trying is not something that's deemed attractive. It actually repels because it's too much. Anything that we look at has an energy exchange. If one person is trying and doing 95% of the heavy lifting, the other person is doing 5%, there's something off about that, right? And it's much more difficult to influence someone. Okay. Now, the chasing and massive action, it's where people say, oh, it's just a numbers game. Okay, it's that approach. Okay. And it's certainly so much better than doing nothing or whining, complaining, hoping. Action is a great thing. I enjoy action. I applaud action. The issue, though, and we'll get into some other examples in a moment, but with this example of calling people, trying to quote unquote force a meeting, like being trying to convince them to buy. Um, Sometimes people will ghost. There's something a little bit off, a little bit awkward about it, or someone just say, no, F off. I don't want that, right? If there's no context, like if you're getting a phone call from someone, you don't know what they are, and they go into a pitch and you're not interested, you might just hang up the phone, right? You're not going to give them the common courtesy that you normally give someone, right? Because it's that chasey type of energy. So the next level is becoming more attractive. This is what some people would call attraction marketing. Okay. And in this case, becoming more attractive starts with knowing how to articulate your value, how to hook attention, right? The old elevator pitch. Okay. Also, getting in front of people where the likelihood of what you're offering, what you're selling in this case, is going to be more attractive and relevant to them, right? That's the next thing is making sure that it's relevant. And in that case, for it to be relevant to someone, they have to at least be curious about it, and better yet, have a problem that you can solve. So I'll use my example. Back in the day, that first offer was LinkedIn consulting, LinkedIn lead generation, right? The whole concept was to show small business owners how to get leads using LinkedIn. And so a lot of people found that relevant because most of the small business owners, they had lead generation problems. They had trouble getting clients, right? So I was showing them a different way, a new way of doing it, right? At that time, which was very innovative. And it invoked curiosity because they had a certain context around the platform, right? So it was a nice fit in terms of something that was attractive enough to get people to pay attention. Now, this is where refining your pitch, this is where understanding who your avatar, if we're talking about marketing and business, comes in. Okay. Because what will happen when you have something that has initial perceived attractiveness, right? This is where you'll have more long form meetings, longer conversations. You have more attention from people. You have more of a chance to go deeper and articulate value and connect. Okay. So where sales can start to happen. Okay. This is where we hear about attraction marketing. Okay. And it's a similar concept actually in dating, which we'll talk about in a minute because there's a lot of parallels there. When we hear about attraction marketing, we hear about, having a good-looking website, your website copy, having your messaging dialed in, having ads that speak to people. And there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of validity in that, having it be something that attracts people, right? And attraction starts again with attention, making sure that something is relevant and being more specific. What about making things irresistible, though? So this is the layer that most people don't go to. Okay. And if you start to unlock this layer, this is where the quote unquote magic really starts to happen in any area. And make becoming irresistible to someone or something, and let's just say the irresistible offer, which is a concept that's been talked about a lot in a very trite way. Yeah, have an offer be irresistible, right? But if we look at it from an energy level, okay, making something irresistible to someone or to a group of people starts with understanding their needs on a subconscious level, being able to really understand that person, okay? And then you being or you presenting or you sharing something that's quite literally an irresistible match, where on a subconscious level, it feeds their needs and just pulls people in, okay? Think of it this way. It's sort of like if you think of a gold rush, okay? And you know that there's going to be, in the next few days, there's going to be a bunch of people coming to a town to mine for gold, right? And they've got money in their pockets, they've got excitement in their eyes, they're willing to do whatever it takes. This is their opportunity of a lifetime, okay? And you're out there, you set up a little stand and you stock up on shovels. You have decent quality shovels. You're the only person selling shovels. If they come and they don't have a shovel, guess what? They're buying from you. Price isn't all that important. It's actually irrelevant at that point, especially if they think your shovel can get them more gold, right? You quite literally rig the game in your favor. And I'm big on this. I'm big on setting things up in a way where they're rigged in your favor. Okay. Because I believe that's really the game that we all ought to be playing. Okay. I believe as a conscious being, as someone who has ambitions and also understands that things happen at an energy and identity level, why not rig the game in your favor, right? It makes the possibilities so much more enjoyable and limitless. Now, when you think of irresistibility, I want you to think of irresistibility as a standard for yourself. Okay. I want you to play with that idea. When you have this level of empathy that leads to irresistibility, the objections that may come up, let's say in a business context, are anticipated and flushed out in advance before even making someone the offer. Okay. That's a level of empathy. That's a level of understanding. That's a level of awareness that leads to irresistibility. And I'll give you an example. So, as my business offer evolved, what happened was I ended up working with a very specific niche of entrepreneurs, business people. And at one point, it was the only game in town that delivered what they wanted. And these people all had a specific goal. And it was quite literally like selling shovels to people who were going to mine for gold. The offer became irresistible. And to stack things on top of that, most of my lead flow would come from a trusted source, a referral that I had in a very specific mastermind group that was full of these people. So a lot of the trust objections weren't relevant. And so the offer became irresistible. Now, I believe for something to be irresistible or for someone to be irresistible, this is a very important distinction. This is where a lot of people who are chasing or trying to do a lot, this is what they don't understand. And even find myself, if I'm trying to make stuff happen, sometimes forgetting this. This is a really, really important reminder. For something to be truly irresistible to someone, okay, it has to very clearly be for some and very clearly not for anyone else. So back to that example of that offer. That offer was for a very specific type of person. Okay. For other types of entrepreneurs, that offer would have been completely irrelevant and not something they would have even stopped scrolling on. Yet these people were paying anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000 to buy this offer. Okay. So it shows you the power of irresistibility. And this is where having that more prosperous, abundant consciousness comes in, where we can say, okay, it's okay to have something that's for a very specific type of person, and everyone else, it may not even be relevant to them. They may not even blink an eye, and that's fine. Okay. Another thing that's irresistible is fascination. Okay. It's the person's embodiment. Okay. It's where being around you, being around someone can be irresistible. It's the energy they carry. By the way, high energy is in itself irresistible, right? So when you're feeling good, you're feeling great, you're feeling that lightness, that high energy, it's much easier to quote unquote magnetize and be irresistible to what you'd like to experience. It's that embodiment. So now let's talk about a health goal, or we're not talking about attracting a certain client or a certain type of person. So let's say you have a goal or an intention that you'd like to lose 20 pounds within the next 6 months or sooner, right? What would chasing it look like? Well, first of all, what would doing nothing about it look like? It would be whining, moaning, feeling sad about it, and doing nothing about it, right? So, and that's the same pattern again and again. That's where a lot of people are with that area of their life. Chasing would be, okay, I'm committed. I'm going to go force myself at 5 a.m. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to have an extremely restrictive diet where I'm only eating rabbit food, and I'm going to lose this weight come hell or high water, right? Even adding some pills, supplements that enhance that, right? The issue with that is it's not sustainable. Even if someone were to lose the weight that way, it would probably come back and probably come back even in greater sums because the issue is really at an identity level. Okay. That's why when people work with us, we want to address things there. Okay. Because this is a self-image issue. So becoming more attractive to the weight loss goal in this case is the result of understanding habits. Okay. It's approaching things much more moderately. Okay. It's understanding the principles. And becoming irresistible to it is developing a system that works for you that you can keep up naturally. Okay. It's starting on an energy and identity level, then developing the system that keeps the weight off so things happen naturally. And the radical change, the massive action, it may be necessary in this area, but it's only necessary at the start of things to break patterns and build momentum. Okay. But it has to be sustainable to become irresistible. Irresistibility isn't trying, it's not forced effort, it's not that consistent massive action where you have to really force yourself to have willpower. That's not irresistibility. So, how about in dating? About romantic dating? It's a great example. So we use men as an example here, although this can apply to women too. Now, I'll talk about myself and my journey in that area. So in my early teens, I did nothing about dating. I sort of wallowed. I didn't understand what the problem was. I had all sorts of shame about it and sadness and desperation and all these different things. And then lo and behold, there was a catalyst moment. But before that catalyst moment, I wasn't even chasing. My identity corresponded with scarcity in the area. I didn't even see what was around me. I didn't see the possibility. I didn't think that there was any way that I could be attractive to women, which is funny to say, right? But that was my belief of the world, right? And then what happened? I had a catalyst moment, started to learn some things, started to take some action, was hooked almost immediately, and I started to enjoy the pursuit. And what ended up happening, because I was so determined to quote unquote get good at dating, get good at meeting women, right? Attracting women, I took massive action. And sometimes there were times where I'd go out to a nightclub or I'd go out to a bar and it was quite literally there was no joy, there was no soul in it. I was an approach machine. I would go and I would sometimes approach 10, 15 women in a night because I was there to quote unquote practice, right? Which sounds ridiculous, but it was what it was, right? It was part of the journey and it was the chase. And I also learned how to mirror certain behaviors that would make me more attractive, or initially at least. The issue was with chasing that it was a means to an end, right? And it was this habit that was more of a matter of willpower. It wasn't a matter of like truly embodying presence, truly being attractive or irresistible to what it was that I wanted. Okay, it was more of like the chasing high, the pursuit, and every once in a while catching something, right? It was that was the vibe back then. Now, adding intentionality makes someone more attractive in this area. Just being clear on what's attractive to them, what you bring to the table, okay, attractive behaviors, having litmus tests, okay, coming from more of the place of like, okay, instead of me having to get the other person to like me, we're co-creating an experience, or let me see what this person is about, more curiosity. Okay, it leads to more neutrality, it leads to more of an appreciation of the other person. Also, upgrading self-image, making behaviors more permanent is huge here, right? Because there is an essence to it. Now, when it comes to the principle of irresistibility in dating, we have to understand, and this is where it's in a lot of ways the opposite of chasing. Being irresistible means that you are for some and not for others, right? If you're irresistible and you're clear on dating, and let's say that you want to have 5 kids and live in the country when you meet your person, let's just say that's going to be for some and not for others. And that's okay. Because for the person that wants that too, there's instant irresistibility. Okay. What also happens is if our intention is to become irresistible and to embody that irresistibility, it's so much more natural and easier to develop a deep empathy, a deep appreciation of understanding who your potential dating avatars are on a subconscious level, and then becoming an energy and an identity match to that. Okay. Also, irresistibility is calibrating in the moment, understanding people's needs, embodying those different parts of yourself, okay, that are still natural and authentically you, in correspondence with that person. Again, it's that co-creation piece. Okay. And inviting someone in is irresistible. It's so much more powerful than chasing. Okay. It's bringing someone in, inviting someone in. This isn't just a masculine, feminine thing. Women can do this too, but it's inviting someone in to co create and have the experience. So that's more of the irresistibility piece. Okay. So again, what's the difference between being attractive and being irresistible? Attractive has certain traits. It could be attractive at the moment. It's establishing relevance or establishing initial attraction, initial curiosity. Irresistibility is the full embodiment. Okay. It's being of the essence that's irresistible to the other person in this case of dating. Okay. Also, it's your beingness, your lifestyle, right? It's making it irresistible to that specific type of person. Okay, where literally it's a great match for them. And this is really important on a subconscious level, not just a conscious level, because sometimes people will say they want something, one thing, and they'll really want something else on a subconscious level. And that's a different topic for a different time. That's a really important topic in that area as well. So my question for you, what if irresistibility was your target and standard? Okay, what if it wasn't just about, okay, let me just take massive action, go and get something or get someone? What if it wasn't, okay, let me just become more attractive to it? What if it was like, I want to become irresistible to it, so it happens inevitably and naturally? Okay. Now it's this way of essence. It's the most powerful way to draw in what we'd like. It's quite literally irresistible. Where can you become, if you look at what you want the most right now, your biggest goals, your biggest intentions, where can you become more irresistible? What can you do with the intention of making your, not with chasing, not with taking massive action, but with making yourself embodying more of that irresistibility? And what might be right now limiting your irresistibility? Because I'll tell you that there are two contradictory energies. If you're chasing, I believe you are repelling your irresistibility. Now, it may sound like a contradiction. Well, I'm taking action. Well, if you're chasing, you're showing the universe and you're showing yourself on a subconscious level that you're not worthy, okay? That you're not yet irresistible, okay? So sometimes the first step is to stop the chasing and is to make your actions much more intentional to showcase more of that irresistibility. So, food for thought, reflect on this, contemplate it. Most importantly, use this as a litmus test. How much more powerful would you be if becoming irresistible in every area of your life was the target and the standard? It's so much more fun. It's such a more rewarding game to play than the game of chasing and pursuing and trying. You'll never go back. And this is an important reminder for all of us because in society, especially in the world of self-help and business and ambitious people and all, everyone who talks about success, it's so often say, take massive action, just do it, man. Well, here's a new way. Become irresistible. Take massive action towards creating irresistibility, not towards chasing what you want. That's all I got for you today. I'll talk to you soon.